Picture this. You did everything right. You took off your shoes. You emptied your pockets. You thought you were fully prepared. Then a TSA officer waves you aside, not because you broke a rule on purpose, but because of a mistake almost every traveler makes without even realizing it. And in 2026, screening officers are trained more closely than ever to catch exactly these 7 patterns. Some of them so small you would never expect them, some of them so common that you have probably made one already without knowing. And today we are breaking down every single one, so you can walk through security fast, calm, and without a single red flag. Because the professionals who work this line every day already know exactly what separates a smooth traveler from someone stuck for 20 extra minutes. And by the time we reach the very last mistake on this list, you will understand exactly why it is the one experienced officers say catches people the most. Before we get into it, if you are someone who wants to travel with less stress and more confidence, especially later in life, go ahead and subscribe to Fly Smart After 70 because we break down exactly this kind of practical travel knowledge every single week. And stay close, because mistake number 1 on this list is the one that catches even frequent flyers completely off guard. Mistake number 7, using too few security bins. This is the mistake nobody thinks is a mistake, because it looks like efficiency. You walk up to the belt, you stack your laptop, your shoes, your jacket, your belt, and your phone into a single bin, thinking you are saving time. And in your mind, fewer bins means a faster line. But officers see it completely differently, because a stacked, overloaded bin is one of the hardest things for an X-ray screener to read clearly. Dense metal from a laptop can block the shape of what is underneath it. A shoe can hide the outline of a phone, and once the image on the screen is unclear, the system does not guess at flags, and that bin gets pulled for a manual check right there in front of everyone behind you. Here is the part most travelers never notice. TSA officers are trained to visually scan bins before they even hit the scanner, and a bin piled high with mixed items is treated as a higher risk bin automatically, not because you did anything wrong, but because clutter reads as concealment, even when there is nothing to hide. And here is the twist. The professionals who fly constantly, the ones who move through security in under 90 seconds, do the opposite of what feels efficient. They use every single bin available, one for electronics, one for shoes and belt, one for jackets and personal items, because a clean separated bin gets read instantly and waved through without a second look. Think about what that means for you. The extra 10 seconds it takes to grab one more bin is nothing compared to the 2, 3, sometimes 5 minutes you lose standing to the side while an officer manually searches through your bag by hand. And it gets worse if you are traveling with a companion, because if your items are mixed together in a shared bin and something gets flagged, both of you are now waiting. Both of you are now being questioned about whose item is whose. So here is the simple fix. Never combine electronics with clothing, never combine shoes with anything metal, and never assume that stacking saves time. Because in 2026, a messy bin is treated the same way a messy answer is treated in an interview. It invites more questions, not fewer. And there is one more detail almost nobody thinks about. The order you place items into your bins actually matters too. Heavy, dense objects on the bottom, lighter, loose items on top, because a jumbled mix forces the screener to slow the belt down and rewind the image just to separate one shape from another, and every rewind adds seconds that add up across an entire line of travelers behind you. Mistake number 6, wearing too much metal through security. This one feels almost old-fashioned because most travelers assume they already know the rule. Take off your belt, take off your watch, empty your pockets. But here is what has changed. The scanners used in 2026 are far more sensitive than the ones from even 5 years ago, and they are calibrated to flag smaller amounts of metal than before. That means things people used to walk through wearing without a problem. Underwire in certain bras, decorative buttons, metal zippers on boots, thick rings, layered necklaces can now trigger a full body scan alarm. And once that alarm goes off, you are not simply waved through with an apology, you are moved to secondary screening, which usually means a pat down in a specific area, and a wand scan to confirm exactly where the metal is. Here is the part that surprises people the most. It is not really about the size of the metal. It is about the shape and the location on your body. A flat metal object near your waistband can look, on a scan, similar to something officers are trained to search for immediately. And once that shape appears on their screen, they are required to check it, no matter how harmless it obviously is in person. And here is the twist most travelers do not expect. Older travelers get pulled for this constantly because knee braces, hip replacements, and other medical hardware naturally contain metal. And if you do not mention it before you walk through the scanner, the alarm triggers, and now you are being patted down for something you could have explained in 5 seconds beforehand. So here is what actually works. Before you step into the scanner, remove your belt completely, remove your watch, take everything out of every pocket, including small coins and folded receipts with metallic ink. And if you have any medical metal in your body, mention it to the officer before you walk through, not after the alarm sounds. This single habit alone can turn a stressful, embarrassing pat down into a completely normal 5-second conversation. And here is one more thing worth remembering. Jewelry does not need to be expensive to trigger an alarm. A simple thick chain, a heavy bracelet, or even multiple thin rings stacked together on one finger can add up to enough metal mass to set off the scanner. So if you are wearing several pieces at once, it is often faster to simply slip them into your carry-on bag before you reach the line rather than risk the alarm at all. Mistake number 5. Flying without a real ID or valid passport. This is the mistake that does not happen at the checkpoint. It happens before you even get there. Because by 2026, every domestic flight inside the United States requires identification that meets Real ID standards. And here is the problem. A huge number of travelers still do not realize their driver's license does not qualify. If your license does not have that small star marking in the corner, it may not be accepted at all. And when that happens, there is no negotiating. There is no explaining your situation to a supervisor. You simply are not allowed to board. Here is where it gets especially confusing for people who do not fly often. You might think, I have flown before with this exact license. I will be fine. But the rules have shifted, and many travelers only discover the change standing at the counter, with their flight boarding in 20 minutes, and no way to fix it in time. There is one alternative that still works. A valid, unexpired passport can be used instead of a Real ID compliant license, even for a flight that never leaves the country. But here's the trap. If your passport expired last year and you assumed your regular license would cover you, you are now stuck with neither option working. And here is the twist that catches even experienced travelers. This rule applies just as strictly to older travelers who have not needed a passport in years, because they mainly drive locally, and their license, while perfectly valid for driving, was simply never updated to real ID standards. So here is the fix. Before your next trip, look at your license right now. Check the top right corner for a small star or marking. If it is not there, start the Real ID renewal process immediately, because it requires original documents, proof of address, and sometimes an in-person visit, none of which can be rushed the night before a flight. And here is something worth mentioning for families traveling together. Children under a certain age are usually exempt from needing their own identification for domestic flights, but every adult in the group is checked individually. So even if one traveler in your party has a compliant ID, that does not cover anyone else standing beside them at the counter. Mistake number 4. Leaving electronics buried inside your carry-on. This mistake feels completely reasonable in the moment. You pack your laptop, your tablet, your camera, and your charging cables neatly inside your bag, surrounded by clothes to keep them protected, and in your mind, that is smart, organized packing, but security officers see it as the opposite of smart, because a laptop or tablet buried under layers of clothing creates a dense, overlapping shape on the X-ray screen, and dense overlapping shapes are exactly what officers are trained to stop and investigate. Here is what actually happens. The moment a large electronic device is not clearly separated and visible in the scan, the belt stops, your bag gets pulled, and an officer opens it by hand, unpacking your neatly folded clothes just to physically confirm what the scanner could not clearly see. And here is the twist. This is not only about laptops anymore. Tablets, electronic readers, and larger battery packs now fall under the same scrutiny, because officers cannot always tell the difference between a tablet and other flat, dense devices just from the outline on a screen, and even a thin electronic reader tucked inside a book pocket can create enough density to trigger a manual check all on its own. So here is what professional travelers actually do. They keep laptops and tablets in an easily accessible pocket, ideally one dedicated slot near the top of the bag. They place them flat, with no clothing wrapped around them, and they pull them out before the bin even reaches the scanner if the checkpoint requires it. This single habit alone can be the difference between walking straight through and standing at the side while a stranger unpacks your bag in front of a line of impatient travelers behind you. And here is a detail that trips up even seasoned travelers. Cables matter too. A tangled knot of charging cords wrapped around a battery pack creates its own dense, confusing shape on the screen. So instead of stuffing every cable into one small pouch, it helps to keep them loosely coiled and separated from anything metal, because a clean, simple shape moves through scanning far faster than a tangled one ever will. Mistake number 3. Overstuffing your TSA liquids bag. Almost everyone has heard the basic rule by now: containers under 100 milliliters, everything inside one clear quart-sized bag, and most travelers assume that as long as their bottles are small enough, they are automatically fine. But here is where the real mistake happens. It is not about the size of each bottle. It is about how many bottles you are trying to force into that one bag. In 2026, officers are trained to notice bags that are visibly overstuffed, bulging at the seams, barely zipping closed, because a bag that is stretched to its limit is harder to scan clearly, and anything that is harder to scan clearly gets a second look. Here is the part that surprises people the most, even if every single container inside technically follows the size limit. If the bag itself will not lay flat, if it will not close properly, officers are allowed to ask you to remove items on the spot, right there at the checkpoint, while the line behind you waits. And here is the twist most travelers never expect. Duplicate items are one of the biggest triggers. 3 nearly identical small bottles of the same lotion, several tiny perfume samples, multiple mini toothpaste tubes. This pattern can actually raise suspicion because officers are trained to notice when someone appears to be splitting a larger amount of liquid into smaller containers, specifically to get around the 100 milliliter rule. So here is the fix that actually works. Before you pack, lay every liquid item out and count them. Honestly, if the bag does not close flat and smooth without pressing down on it, you have too many items. Remove the ones you can buy at your destination and keep only what you truly need for the flight itself, because a thin, clearly organized bag moves through scanning in seconds, while a bulging one becomes the reason you are standing off to the side explaining yourself. And one more small detail worth remembering: the bag itself needs to come completely out of your carry-on and lay flat in its own separate bin. Tucking it inside a jacket pocket or leaving it buried under other items defeats the entire purpose, because officers need to see it clearly and separately from everything else moving through the scanner at the same time. Mistake number 2. Ignoring random secondary screening instructions. This mistake is different from the others because it has nothing to do with what you packed and everything to do with how you respond in the moment. Random secondary screening happens to travelers with completely clean records, completely normal bags, and completely valid documents. It is not a punishment. It is simply part of how the system operates. But here is where people get it wrong. When an officer asks you to step aside for additional screening, many travelers react with confusion, frustration, or repeated questions about why they were chosen. And that reaction, more than anything in their bag, is what extends the delay. Here is what most people do not realize. Officers are trained to read behavior just as closely as they read baggage, hesitation, arguing, or repeatedly asking why can actually prompt a more thorough check. Not because you did anything wrong, but because calm, clear cooperation is the fastest way through any screening process, while confusion and pushback naturally slow it down. And here is the twist that catches so many travelers off guard. If you are asked to step into a scanner a second time, or asked to wait for a pat-down, this is often completely random and rotates automatically among travelers. It is not personal, and it is not a sign that something is wrong with you or your belongings. So here is what actually works when you are selected. Follow the instructions immediately. Keep your hands visible. Answer questions directly without over-explaining, and remember that the officer in front of you does not control the randomness. They are simply doing the next required step. The calmer and more direct you are, the faster this entire process finishes, usually in under 2 minutes. And here is something worth keeping in mind if you travel with a companion. If only one of you is selected for additional screening, the other person is usually allowed to wait nearby. And staying visibly patient rather than hovering or repeatedly asking questions on behalf of the person being screened actually helps the process move faster for both of you. Mistake number 1. Bringing a power bank without checking watt-hour limits. This is the mistake that used to be completely harmless. And today, It is one of the fastest ways to lose an item permanently at the checkpoint. Most travelers believe they are safe as long as their power bank looks normal. 20,000 milliamp hours. That sounds fine. 30,000 milliamp hours. That sounds even better for a long trip. But here is exactly where people get caught. Because officers are not measuring milliamp hours at all, they are measuring watt hours. And the limit is clear: 100 watt hours maximum for anything allowed on board. Here is the part almost nobody checks before they travel. Some power banks display the watt-hour number clearly on the outside. Some hide it in extremely small text. And some do not display it anywhere at all. And if that number cannot be verified on the spot, officers treat the entire device as an automatic risk, regardless of how new or expensive it looks. And here is the twist that shocks most travelers completely. Power banks are already banned from checked luggage because of fire risk. But if a power bank exceeds that 100 watt-hour limit, it is also banned from carry-on, which means you may have packed something that is not legally allowed on the plane at all in either bag, and you will only discover this the moment it is taken from you. It gets even more complicated with newer high-capacity power banks, because depending on the internal voltage, a large milliamp hour rating can quietly cross that 100 watt-hour line without the number itself ever changing on the label. So the very battery you bought specifically for a safety backup, more charge for emergencies, can be the exact reason it gets confiscated at the checkpoint. So here is the simple rule that removes all the guesswork. Before your next flight, check your power bank for a clearly printed watt-hour number. If you cannot find one anywhere on the device, leave it home. If you do find one and it is under 100, you are fine. And if it is over that limit, plan to travel without it, because at that point, the decision is no longer yours to make. It belongs entirely to the officer standing at the scanner. And here is a final detail that saves people constantly. If you own more than one power bank, do not assume the rule only applies to the biggest one. Every single power bank in your bag needs to individually meet that same limit, because officers check each device on its own, not the total number you are carrying. So a smaller backup battery sitting quietly in a side pocket can still get pulled if its own label is missing or unclear. 7 mistakes, none of them random, every single one enforced constantly at checkpoints across the country. Too few bins flagged, too much metal pulled aside, no real ID and no valid passport, not allowed to board, electronics buried in your bag unpacked by hand, an overstuffed liquids bag searched item by item, ignoring secondary screening instructions, extra delay, a power bank over the limit, gone completely. And here is the truth: most travelers never stop to consider these checkpoints are not designed to punish you. They are designed to keep an enormous, constantly moving system safe for everyone passing through it. And that system does not slow down or make exceptions just because someone did not know the current rule. So before your next trip, take 10 quiet minutes, check your ID, check your power bank, check how your liquids bag actually closes, because that small bit of preparation is the real difference between walking through security calmly and standing off to the side while everyone else moves past you. None of these 7 mistakes require expensive gear, special training, or years of flying experience. They simply require 10 quiet minutes of attention before you ever leave the house. And that is exactly why the travelers who move through checkpoints the fastest are rarely the ones with the fanciest luggage. They are simply the ones who checked these small details ahead of time, calmly, without rushing, the night before their flight rather than the morning of it. If this helped you feel more ready for your next flight, subscribe to Fly Smart After 70 so you never miss the next update before your travel dates. Drop a comment with the mistake on this list that surprised you the most, and we will see you in the next one. Because in airports, it is never luck, and it is never experience, it is always preparation.